All right, I am live here finally, and OBS hopefully is working. And it seems like people are able to get on. Can you hear me this time? Dear God, I've had so many issues with this live streaming stuff. I feel like I am just not good at it yet, but hey, that's what's going to happen with practice, right? So if you can hear me, just post that you can hear me in the chat, and then I'll say, hey, that's cool. That would be dope to know that you can hear me this time, because that. Hey, Javier. Thank you, Javier. Okay, fantastic. Until when is the discount? There's a countdown clock on the discount thing. So just look at that. Just look at that countdown clock. That'll show you. So what's up? What am I here? Why am I doing this? What's going on here? What's the happening? Well, I've been raging on React a little bit lately, and it's kind of driving me nuts because I've really realized. I haven't realized this recently, but I've realized this a long time ago, and it's just now turning into a point where I'm actually angry about it. That React, if you aren't using Next.js, React server-side rendering is just about the most frustrating thing in the world. There's a handful of reasons why, but mostly if you want to get server-side rendered plus your data plus code splitting, you lose basically everything, and the whole thing runs like total ass, and the developer experience is bad. So the next question is, well, okay, Next.js. Why don't you use Next.js? And I like Next.js. It's totally fine. It's not my favorite platform. There's a handful of reasons why I don't like it. As much as something like Svelte Kit, right? But at the end of the day, my options for getting SSR working with React, and pretty much for anybody, if you're in React land, your options are Next.js or Gatsby. And so if I'm going to have to rewrite my entire site in Next.js, that's going to be a really substantial rewrite. Now, my site, which is leveluptutorials.com, it predates Next.js and it predates Create React App. So that's why we didn't write it on those things. Well, Create React App for production, I don't know about that anyways. But that's why we didn't use Next.js, because it predates it really. And at no point was I like, oh yeah, let's do a big full rewrite of the site, until sort of right now. So that leads us to kind of where I'm at today, which is we have a client-side rendered version of the site, which is fine. The client-side rendered version of the site is speedy. It's maybe not right now because of my CPU, but the client-side rendered version of the site is very good for the most part, except for you do really miss out on a whole ton of things with server-side rendered that I thought I would be fine without. But like, let's say we had, social images generation. It becomes a giant pain in the butt without server-side rendering. And then you can get into preloading, pre-rendering. You get into a whole bunch of stuff. But all of that just feels like you're throwing a bunch of scaffolding on a house made of toothpicks in the first place. So this month I created a Svelte Kit course, and it was the best, the very best framework experience I've had. I've really liked Svelte for a long time. It feels very familiar to, I used to write a lot of Meteor Blaze code, and not that it feels like Blaze, but there's a lot of simplicity that carries over into Svelte that I really miss when moving to React. So I started to say like, okay, Svelte Kit, hey, Svelte Kit's pretty cool. What would it take for me to rewrite the whole site into Svelte Kit? Well, obviously, it's going to take a whole lot. It's going to take a whole lot for me to write it in Svelte. But I wanted to see, maybe just as a proof of concept, what that would actually look and feel like. So I started cranking on this in about 3 hours. I was able to get server-side rendering, code splitting, all of our data coming in from our API that works correctly with our GraphQL code generator, which I'll show you. All of this stuff, and even our authentication. Our authentication worked in 3 hours. I didn't have to do anything really. I mean, I wrote the authentication system, so I know it very well, but like, those were the hardest problems, and being like, okay, well, now it's just going to be kind of a lot of grunt work to just push the code. Now I don't know if I necessarily want to put my team through that, but it just got me thinking, right? I'm going to take these off. So I'm going to be doing some React to Svelte stuff, and just to show you the flow of what I'm working with here. Here, this little tool that you see over here on the left, this is called this is called Avalanche, which is a tool that I built. It's like a CLI for level up tutorials. And so, like, let's say I wanted to just develop the API for a site. I would just say, oh, just develop the API. It's going to do all that stuff. Somebody's asking if I rewrote or refactored. Well, I'm doing a lot of copying and pasting, and certainly a lot of the CSS is being moved over. But one of the things you start to learn about when you're doing a conversion from React to Svelte, like the big thing that you realize is that there are 1,000 libraries that you need in React to do anything worthwhile. And what you soon realize is that not only do you not have 1,000 libraries to do anything worthwhile in Svelt Kit, or Svelte in general, but Svelt Kit specifically, not only do you not have those 1,000 libraries, but you don't have to make those choices. I don't have to make the choice if I'm going to use Redux, Context, ZooStand, XState, Immer with who knows what. I don't have to make those choices because there is a store built in to Svelte and Svelt Kit, right? There's a store built in. I just save something to the store and I can watch it reactively or not. And like, just the fact that I don't have to make that choice already changes things quite a bit for me. I don't know why the API is getting so high. Live streaming really slows my computer down quite a bit. So what I have here is, this is the API up and running. This is the Level Up Tutorials code base, which is a mono repo that includes our API, that includes the UI of our site, which is currently in Vite, and React, and using something called Vite SSR, which is a really great package by all accounts. It's not their fault that React SSR sucks. I'm just gonna say that, So what I have here is this repo, and I was like, well, maybe here's what I'll do. I'll just create a Svelt Kit app in here. You can see it. I'm just calling it Svelte UI right now because there's another UI folder. And I'm just going to port some of the components over here and there and see how it goes. Now, if you want to learn more about Svelt Kit itself, like I said, we have this tutorial course. It's 24 videos, and we have a Svelte course as well if you're interested in Svelte after all of this. But what you're going to see while I'm working on these components here, and I'll try to talk a little bit about it while I'm doing it, but by all intents, I kind of want to, just create components. What you'll see is that you end up having a lot of situations where the component will be complete before, in the other side of things, the imports were even finished, because I don't need to import React. I'm not going to need to import styled components. I'm not going to need to import Framer Motion. Okay, so we have logos, and we have maybe some elements or buttons, and then we have some logos themselves. But not only that, but even just looping things. You know what? I feel like I'm waking up from an over-engineered hell to realize just how much nicer some of the stuff in Svelt Kit is. We're going to see if my computer holds up here, because I have no idea what's going on with this. It's the 16-inch MacBook Pro. Maybe I'm just fiery this week, but everything is getting me a little bit more upset. Like the fact that this 16-inch MacBook Pro with a ton of RAM is choking, just barely doing anything on live streaming. So yeah, I'm getting upset with certain libraries and systems choking on things. Svelte UI. Here we go. So I change directories into my Svelte UI, npm run dev, and this gets the Vite. I feel like I have to say Vite every single time because nobody knows how it's pronounced. And this will get this going here. Andreas says, get an M1. Believe me, I'm working on it. Whenever the M1 MacBook Pro comes out, this baby is going on the market, and I'm going to sell it and get an M1 or M1X, whatever that ends up being, because I can't take it. This thing is, it's slow for what I do, which is a lot of video, right? When you do a lot of video for a living, it kind of sucks when CPU and the fans are always going like crazy bonkers. Especially when you're trying to show a speed run of something and you can't get any speed. So yeah. Oh, also we're probably going to do an episode on some of this stuff too for syntax, just because, I don't know, I've had a lot of thoughts about React SSR, and the only good answer to my problems, the only good answer is rewrite the thing in Next.js. And you know, that's a fine answer. And anybody who says, why don't you just write in Next.js? That's great. Especially if we could have written it from Next.js in the beginning, I probably would have been way happier. You know, I could do a conversion to Next.js. But whether or not that ends up being the right thing for us in the end is still something we'll have to figure out. You know, just a little bit of frustration at, you know, the way things have gone here for React SSR, especially, you know, rolling out things like suspense and React Lazy, but then saying, oh yeah, by the way, if you need SSR, which, you know, many projects do, you're going to need this Babel plugin or this Webpack plugin. But like, oh, that doesn't work in every setup, right? It doesn't work with Vite. That doesn't work with the stuff that we're using. So, well, I guess I'm just screwed then. unless I can get on Next.js, which again is certainly an option. Don't get me wrong. So this is the Svelte version of the site. I can very much assure you that if anything looks choppy or slow, it's because of my computer CPU running. The neat thing about this site is, like I mentioned, I already have authentication working, and I already have server-side rendering working for our data within our API. If we take a look at this page, this data is coming in directly from our real development API, the same way that the React production version of the site is. And here's all these page titles right here. What is Sapper? All this stuff comes in perfectly. So this little bit of code to get this up and running is pretty minuscule, and that's the way I like it. Oh my dear God, this is slow. Maybe my dreams of doing a speed run while live streaming. Maybe I'm just better off explaining why I'm having these issues and whatever, because this is painful. Here, hold on one second. Let me try to do some things. I'm going to turn off my video of me. I don't need to be on this stream. Let's see if that makes things a little bit better. Okay, I don't know if that did. Either way. So like, let's take a look. This is the page that I was just showing you where we had server-side rendered data for our GraphQL API. And this is the code that generates that page. Now, granted, this isn't the real page, and this is not how it looks, and there's no CSS, but check it out. We have generated a function from our GraphQL code. And this is just a GraphQL query, and we ran GraphQL code gen on it, and it spits out a GraphQL function that's not greatly named right now because of how it's generated, but it's async playlist tutorials. And then inside of the load function, which is analogous to Next.js's get initial props or get static props, this thing runs on the server side and client side. This load function allows us to prefetch data on the server before this thing's rendered. And what's cool about that is that we can just say, hey, await us getting these tutorials. Here's the slug, which could come from, you know, the actual slug if I was doing that, and return it as props into the component as the tutorials prop. Then we make that tutorials prop available. Then we say each tutorials as tutorial, and each one just spits out, and that's it. I mean, that's pretty sick. And then if we wanted to do a client-side rendered one, because we also do some client-side rendering stuff where like it doesn't need to be server-side rendered, you know, like a blog post, sure you want that server-side rendered, but maybe like a little block on the homepage you don't need to be server-side rendered. So let's say the latest tutorial block is a good example of that. And once again, we used a GraphQL generated function, and this time there's no async on here because you'll notice this isn't inside of any sort of load, and this isn't being run server side. So this is being done client side, and what we can do is to say, all right, let's just get the latest series function. We say, hey, give me the latest series, and it puts it into an observable named series that we can subscribe to. And then in the code, we can just say series, data, list series, title, whatever. And you know, all that stuff, hashtag just works. You can see that just working right here, this latest tutorial series Sapper for beginner. And this is hitting our real database. This took me no time to set up. So what I'm doing here, and will hope to do in this video, is to try to get this page to look a little bit more like this page and this site. Granted, the colors and the theming stuff, that's a whole separate conversation, but trying to get a little bit more like this. And if that can work, then maybe move on to another one or another one. I think maybe the main goal would be to do the entire blog. And that way we could have maybe just the blog be server-side rendered. That's a thing that people do. And then from there, we could move on. So check it out. Here we have the code. And let's get into some actual thinking what I said I was going to do, which is that speed running of converting components. So the component that I'm working on right now is going to be this choose your path one, because this is basically just a scrollable situation here where it's a scrollable. You can scroll these to side if my CPU lets me do it. You can scroll them side to side. You can hover and get a little bit of this. I don't know if I'll even worry about that right now. And then we just have a simple button here. The button CSS is not going to be in here just yet, but let's go ahead. Somebody says the title here is false. What does that mean? You looking for a speedrun? I would be doing more speedrunning here, but I'm just trying to get everybody up to speed in the speedrun. Okay, so let's work on this component. So in the past, we had a bunch of styled components bullshit, and we had a bunch of styled component stuff that like is a logo strip, initial opacity, and this is all being done in a styled components situation that looks like this. So what I like to do is I pretty much grab the styled components that I have here, and I copy them, and then I create a style tag. Hopefully my autocomplete works. Oh, I did Svelte to React. Oops. Maybe see if I can change it. My Sorry for goofing up that title. Holy cow. OBS is my hell here. You guys can't see my face right now because I had to stop it, but it's not happy. React to Svelte speedrun. Okay, cool. Okay, so what I do is I grab all of the styled components, which are very similar to just in general CSS. So then we'll create a style tag, which, you know, honestly, this auto-completion is being a baby right now. One thing I do when I'm creating this, when I'm moving my styled components over into like a local style tag here, is I always do lang as CSS. Not necessarily because I want to use Sass for this whole entire project, but because I would like to not have to refactor every single little bit of nesting. And now there is a CSS nesting for post CSS that we've used quite a bit as well. But you know what is wrong with that is, well, it's not wrong, but it's very difficult to convert Sass or styled components over to that, because specifically you need ampersands in 1,000 different places, and I don't really feel like messing with my CSS that much. So first and foremost, we need a div name strip. Of course, my auto-completion is going to crap under this. You could always set CSS as SCSS as the default in svelte.config. Yes, you can very well do that. But what I don't want to do, believe it or not, is have most of the site be in SCSS. If that makes sense, because I'm would like to move away from non-standard CSS and move more into the realm of post CSS, where we're working with like future CSS presets, things like the actual CSS nesting spec rather than Sass. So I hear you, but I think I'd want to keep it like a temporary thing. Okay, so we have a div of strip. You know what I do with these styles, since these are styled components, you take this, you flip it, you turn it into a class name, you do the lowercase, and then you create the style. Holy cow. I wasn't factoring in just how annoying a slow computer would be during this. So the same thing goes with this strip flex. Now, the strip flex, I honestly don't know too much what this is doing. I don't know if I wrote this code specifically when I did, but it was just a div. So I'm going to just remove anything. And when I find some styled components function stuff, I just comment it out for right now. So I can just like comment it out, and then I basically turn everything into a class with a lowercase title like this. Maybe I'll hyphenate it as long as I have the time to do that. It depends on how fast you want to be with it. But turning these into this is not necessarily the most fun. In fact, some things like with this close button, I'm not even going to worry about it right now, because it doesn't need to be fully working. Like what it needs to be is, like I said, a proof of concept. It needs to be that it works and that it looks good from a distance. Good from a distance is kind of going to be the strategy for this until we can take a stronger look at it. Because in reality, if we're doing a full rewrite of this thing, you'd kind of want it to be like, a little bit of rethought out while you're doing it. Just like, a new set of eyes. Somebody's asking about Tailwind. You know what? We write our own utility classes. Tailwind's fine. Utility classes are fine. I don't like writing all of my CSS with 1,000 classes here. I don't like that. I don't like the apply keyword. So Tailwind is fine. I like utilities. But in the end of the day, what I find myself doing is writing my own utility classes and just using those instead. Like I said, nothing against Tailwind. It's not for me. There are some neat things about it. It kind of feels like mixins, like a bunch of pre-made mixins and stuff. I can hang with that. But again, at the end of the day, I almost like to create my own more, because it's less of an overhead for me to learn something new that, who knows how long I'll be using it. When you work with this stuff for a long time, you can see the ebbs and flows of these libraries coming and going. It's like, okay, do I want to spend the time or like, I don't know. I have my own Flex classes already that I know how to use really well and that I've augmented with CSS variables. So like, do I need to use the Tailwind? And at the end of the day, what I found is no. Even like I've done quite a bit of work in it, and it's fine, but it's just not for me. So it looks like we've made this Flex wrapper working, and at least all the little logos here are now lining up. That's cool. One thing here, though, is that the real version of the site, and I'll refer to this as a real and a fake version, the real of the version site has them kind of split out, and you can scroll horizontally. I'm not quite sure what's preventing those from doing that. It might be, let's see. So overflow X scroll, overflow Y visible. This is the strip width 100%. Is it because, I think it's because all of these are set to have like a flexible width, so they're just going to shrink down. And in the other one, they were given a width that was passed in via a variable. Now, this is a point where you have to use a little bit of your brain, because like, okay, this is being passed in from a styled components variable, but in the actual implementation of building this, in the real version of this site, we never ever used this component, this logo strip. We never used this ever with different sized logos. And so I have to say, like, is that a thing that we actually need? Or like, can I at this point say these logos are the size that they are, which is 88 pixels. So if we were to say, you know, just make them 88 pixels and call it a day, is that going to work? It's going to work. And to be honest, I don't think we need it to be. Oh, I think I might have given those to the wrong thing. I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't need it to be this crazy. Oh, what is this? So I'm sorry. The width of this is actually some math, which I didn't do this myself personally, but the width of this was. Oh, that's interesting. The width of this initially was set to be the amount of logos times the logo width plus 2 plus an offset. Yeah, I feel like that could be done a little bit better, a little bit more interesting, or I should say less interesting of a way, right? We have what is essentially a grouping of logos, and you want the minimum width of each of the logos to be a specific thing, and I think that will do it. I'm not positive about that. You know, it's easy to say that. But if we were to say each logo style width is 88 pixels, these things are in a flex container. So right now, they're going to be less than 88 pixels wide. Let's dive into this. See, these are the types of problems. We're on this one component. I know I said it's a speed run, but maybe these are some of the problems that just come up, right? These are the types of things that you don't think about when you're moving from one system that has been steadily built upon for, since 2015 or so. So each of these is set to be 88 pixels wide and 88 pixels tall, but at the end of the day, because they're in a flex container, they're getting shrunk. So if you were to say something like, is it flex shrink? To be honest, I don't know. If we were to say flex shrink 0, no. What is that property that prevents the width from getting goofed up? Or maybe even it's a simple solution would be to do like a min width of 88 pixels. If I do a minimum width, like what does that do here? Does that give it to us? I think that might. Dear God, sorry, my computer's driving me bonkers right now. I am getting really upset. Okay, so let's actually give that a try, because you know what? I think that is a simple solution, and a simple solution to me is a good solution, because like this one's being done with a bunch of math, and I really don't think we need to do that. Min-width is going to be 88 pixels, and if I just say minimum width 88 pixels, that maybe just does it. It does it. There we go. So, you know what? I'm not going to try to theorize why this was written this way before, because I didn't write it, but it could, whatever. Sometimes the simple solution isn't necessarily right in front of your eyes, you know what I mean? So we have a style, minimum width, height, cool, and these are inside of a strip flex, which is interesting because we typically do like our own flex containers. I have a flex class that I like to use. In fact, that's a one instance in which I will write utility classes for myself. So like if we were to say, this is me rethinking some of the site. This isn't necessarily a speed run at this point. We could say flex strip, meaning that's a variation of the flex property. And then we can say flex as another class, and that's a utility class that we have. And that utility class doesn't necessarily exist just yet. It did in our styled component setup, you can see here. But you know what? Like I said, I'm all about rethinking some of our stuff right now. Layouts.svelte, I guess it's .scss, maybe layout. Sorry, this code base is massive. Because we have a whole admin section, we have a whole bunch of stuff. I'd be willing to answer any questions about this while I'm doing this, because some of this work is fairly benign. But like, okay, so let's say we had a flex, it's display flex, and display flex, and we would probably have some sort of a default grid gap. Now, the neat thing is that we don't have to worry too much about supporting certain browsers. So I can just say, instead of grid gap even, it's just gap. We just say gap is 20. You know what is funny? In the previous iteration of this, we did a plus if something is next to something in this list, then give it a margin left of 20 pixels. Gap works way better. So here we are. Here's the gap. Now, I mentioned that the other version of the site, Jesus, this CPU is killing me. I mentioned that the other version of the site had some button CSS. The buttons in Level Up tutorials are extremely over-engineered, and that's kind of where I've been looking at some of the stuff when I'm looking at our React setup versus the current setup. Is like, okay, we have buttons, and this Explore button, to use this Explore button in the current version of the site, I have to import a button from elements, and then I have to give it a property of who knows what, right? I don't even know if I actually do give it a property. It might just be the generic button. But in the in the new version of the site, like, man, why can't I just use why can't I just use a button class, or even just a button with augmented classes? And the answer is I could have then, and I can now. So there's nothing in React stopping me from doing that before. We specifically chose to do it this way, and I'm learning a giant lesson about the cost of some of those things, the cost of some of those choices. And the cost is that I'm paying for it right now. And not to dog on styled components, but let me tell you, styled components are a big part of our SSR pains. They flat out do not work without Webpack or Babel. And like, if we add Babel to our current stack, it's causing trouble because our stack isn't meant to have a Babel RC file. And yeah, I switched to YouTube for streaming because regular OBS, I don't know how to stream to multiple services, and I was using Streamlabs OBS, which apparently has a giant memory leak or something. So somebody says, what's my opinion on Rust? Rust is great. I built a contract generator in Rust recently. I took the Rustations, or whatever the like Rust code challenge thing is, and you know what? I really like Rust. Actually, this is a link. It's not a button. It is a difficult language for me. I've primarily learned to code through JavaScript, and while that's fine, it feels very different. So I'm going to give this a class of BTN. Why? Because I like the BTN class. It's nice and concise. So either way, so we're looking at this component here, and we have a React component on one side and the Svelte component on the other side. Are they one-to-one? Not exactly. What's this thing missing here? Well, it's missing this search context and this search value. I'm not sure what history did. We needed history so that we could do a link change. Okay, fine, whatever. But I would prefer not to do it. I don't know. So we don't have this here. The logo strip, when you click on it, isn't going to do any filtering. It's not going to work. In the current version of the site, it filters the tutorials, it puts that into a global state, and then it moves you onto the tutorial page itself, which is great. This one will eventually need to do that. But for right now, it doesn't need to do that because, again, it just needs to look good from a distance. That is... I'm going to actually try to re-add my video. It needs to look good from a distance, and this will look good from a distance. But either way, if we're talking about things we're missing out from this to this, you could see it's pretty it's pretty much just that. And if you look at the total lineage, we're looking at cutting about this component in half to do the same thing. Now, why are we cutting this component in half? Look, where exactly are we losing that size in here? we're mostly losing that size in a bunch of bullshit, really. We're losing that size in the imports, so we don't need to import anything from CSS. We don't need to import anything for our routing just yet. We don't need to import anything from React, and sure, we'll probably need to bring some context in, but we won't need to bring in two things for context, and we won't need to bring in any sort of buttons because we're not going to be using a sort of styled components thing. And then sure, we bring in a whatever. Now, so that gives you a little bit of bump, right? That's 7 lines versus 3 lines for our imports, essentially. And then if you get into the actual component code, this one, it has the function that gets it going, which I could do without. The return that gets it going, which I could do without. And that's what I like about Svelte. You just get into the HTML. And then the actual HTML is a whole hell of a ton easier to read. Now, why is it easier to read? Some of the little things that React makes you do, like for instance, when we wanted to do this with this new or choose your path or this new hot code, if we wanted to do like a little space in here, React made us do these parentheses and spaces because of this span. That's annoying. Another thing here is that, we'll want to add the ARIA stuff back in. Yes, all of that. But other things, I mean, we're using a button component and then telling us that it's actually not a button, it's actually a React router link. So all of that stuff takes space, where with Svelt Kit, we can just say, hey, it's an anchor tag, here's where it's pointed to, right? And then we get into the CSS side of things. The CSS side of things, sure, this CSS ultimately takes up more lines than this one does, but the more styled components you have, the less that's the case. What's interesting here is that, the style being scoped to this file is very similar to how we might use a styled component where we create a page wrapper for it and just put it in. And in fact, a lot of my usage of styled components near the end of me really loving styled components here has been to just create a scoped wrapper for the page. And this one, if I wanted to use Ling as CSS, this one could be even smaller because we could be nesting these things. At the end of the day, this component right now is probably not going to end up being half the size when it's done, but it's going to be pretty darn close. Okay, so now that that one is done, I know the speed running thing kind of went out the window because of how slow my computer's going. But so we have the logos, at least. They exist in here. Here they go. The button's obviously not pretty just yet. Looks like we lost our gap, maybe. Where'd that gap go? Oh my God, this is slow. Okay, gap is back. So, yeah. If we have the button in here, it would look a lot closer. Next one is going to be the home zone. You might be wondering why I'm not doing this latest tutorial series one. This one contains 2 really hefty components, like very hefty components, which is the video player, which honestly I will get working here in some sense, and then the card. The card is a hefty component. This thing is not necessarily hefty in the code it's going to output, but definitely the amount of things it needs to do. Because this is an SVG background, we got all these animations, the data's coming in, there's a lot here, okay? So let's go on to maybe this section here. The VS Code theme is the Level Up Tutorials official theme with the syntax variation. So this is a hybrid of, this is the syntax yellow, this is the syntax black, but then this is the Level Up Tutorials teal, and then if you highlight things, it's the Level Up Tutorials purple. So it's called Level Up Tutorials, and then the actual theme is called Syntax Remix. So that's the theme. Okay, so let's move on to another one. We have, this is killing me, the speed. Okay, so this is essentially the home page that we're cruising on. I'm cruising on the home page. Why? Well, it has a lot of interesting components that have a lot of little interesting things in it. And one thing that I've said a bunch before on this stream, but one thing that I definitely noticed within working in Svelte compared to React in this system is that with Svelte, not only are you writing less code, less boilerplate, less just unimportant code, like that's one aspect, but you're also writing less important code, as in like, I'm trying to maybe come up with the right words to say here, but you're also just straight up engineering less. This is Richard G. This is a Svelte Kit, and Svelte Kit is, I mean, it's very similar to Next.js. It takes a lot from Next.js, but at the same time, it does a lot of things way better than Next.js. One of my big beefs with Next.js is this. I mean, when I say big beef, I mean this is like a little annoyance, and the little annoyance is like the double wrapping of all of your links. Why do I have to have a link component and an A that's being used oddly? Like, I don't like that at all. It makes me feel uncomfortable to do it. I don't like it. Where like Svelte Kit, it just gives you an anchor tag, href. It's HTML. One thing I really enjoy about Svelte Kit overall is it feels like you're writing HTML that has been augmented, where with React, it feels like you're writing JavaScript with HTML shoehorned in. So it doesn't feel as well thought out, especially after all of the changes that have gone in React. And by all means, I'm definitely a much bigger fan of hooks than I was some of the previous setups for React. But I can't necessarily say that our site is as strong as it's ever been. Somebody says, what do you feel about Vue.js? Me personally, I like Vue. I like Vue a lot. And I would probably be using Vue if it wasn't for Svelte, because Svelte feels like it is similar to Vue in some ways, but further in that direction of simplicity. Where Svelte feels like it's dipping its toes into the simplicity while trying to remain quite a bit like React. Where Svelte feels like it's like just diving in to the simplicity. And if Svelte didn't exist, Vue would be I think the best alternative. And Vue is still just an amazing platform anyways. But like React is at one end of the spectrum and Svelte is at the other end of the spectrum, and then Vue is in the middle somewhere. Okay, so this right here, this is the... Are you planning to use TS with Svelte? This is actually TS with Svelte, so we're getting that TS in here. And in fact, one thing that's really nice about this is that when you do try to pass props into a component, it infers those props really nicely, and most of the time without me even having to write any TypeScript. Now, you can get full control over that as well, but it's pretty neat. You know what, I found it to be pretty turnkey in terms of getting ready. Now this component's a little interesting. So we're going to be converting the home zone, which is not a great name for this component, but the home zone is this area that says practical code, and here's a screenshot, clear and focused. So that's this component. And this component is slightly interesting because it does an animation on page enter, and I'm not sure if I'll implement that right now or not. But, we'll see where I get. I also have a another streaming thing I'm doing for Galvanize this evening, so we'll see how far I get here. Okay, so with this one, it's going to be a little bit easier. When I'm converting a Svelte Kit component over, one of the best things is that Svelte doesn't need any sort of function or anything to return HTML. So you start with the HTML first and foremost. And this is a much bigger component than it might seem at first glance because it's really pretty basic. But if we paste it in here, we'll then start to parse out the things that are broken. And it's fairly easy to see the things that aren't going to work. Some of the more annoying things with React are the modifications of things like class name. I've always, since day one in React, I think that's been my least favorite, not my least, there's a lot of least favorite things about React. I don't mean to be hating on React that much, considering I worked in it every single day for so long. But like class name, like you're telling me you can't figure out how to make it just be class? I don't believe that. So class home zone wrapper. Okay, so what am I working on? I am working on essentially what could be thought of as a proof of concept of getting Svelte Kit to run the Level Up tutorial site. I said this, I've been kind of complaining a lot, doing a lot of complaining about React and server-side rendering. And it's my fault for not using the blessed Next.js. I love Next.js, but it's not my, I could use Next.js as an option, but at the end of the day, it's going to require a substantial rewrite for the site to play nice with Next.js. So if you're going to do that anyways, you might as well try something fun, right? And to be honest, if I'm given a blank slate right now and somebody's saying, are you using Next.js or Svelte Kit? What I'm saying is I'm using Svelte Kit right now because it's very cool. Yo, VS Code, you need to just chill for a second. I'm still typing. You'll notice a lot of these commented out blocks about like the media queries. We had our whole styled components media query set up. When I talk about this being like a major transformation, like this is a major transformation. Someone says, how do you feel about having changes that you have to account for $ layout to __ layout when it comes to implement level up? Well, this site wasn't in, was the $ layout in, was the $ layout in Zapper or what? Or was that in Svelt Kit? Because to be honest, I've only ever used the __ layout business, and especially if we're moving it over. So if I'm starting from scratch here, I don't think too much about it. So, or at least right now, I say that right now. I don't who knows? Maybe I'll. So once again, we're hitting one of my utility classes. Some of this class naming is a total mess and something that we would want to do, but I'm not going to do it right now for this. Again, this, as I've said a couple times, this is something that needs to look good at a distance. This is a proof of concept. Like for instance, like this, I'm not going to implement these waypoint animations right now. I've done animations. I did a whole course on animating in Svelte, but I really don't want to right now. Okay. It was a few weeks ago in Svelte. They just changed __ layout or $, which actually explains some things why I saw $ layout in some of the code examples that I was using before. But no, since even we did a course on Svelte Kit for level up tutorials, and since then it's been straight up __ So to be honest, that's what I'm used to. Holy cow, seeing all this underlining, CPU going nuts. I'm going to try to figure out how to get a better CPU situation for next time I do the stream here. So what I'm doing is I'm basically taking any time that I see a React specific component, such as this flex with a zone flex. Flex for us is basically a utility component, like a Flexbox class. And I already ported that over to be a Flexbox class, at least in some regard. So if we were to say div class flex and then zone flex, it's going to pick up this zone flex because it's defined down here in this component now. And again, needs to look good at a distance. Now, these motion divs that exist, these could be really, really, really easily implemented in Svelte. Extremely easily implemented in Svelte. Way, way easier than this. And as much as I love Framer Motion, if we're talking React, Framer Motion is just incredible. And React Spring is incredible too, especially when you think about like doing the 3D stuff in React. I have no idea what 3D would look like in Svelte. But like 3D in React, yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty cool. And using something like React Spring for that is great. And Framer Motion, again, is one of my favorites. But it doesn't matter at the end of the day because in Svelt Kit, not only is it built in, but it's honestly easier. So, okay, so here we are. This is basically what I do. I copy paste the styled components in as SCSS, or in this case, just the SCSS as SCSS. Then I copy and paste the HTML over, and then voila, we're going to have some sort of at least half-assed version of this thing at least going here. So you can see this is the sort of end result of this component without their animations going in, and it's hard to tell because this one isn't smushed, but I have to imagine that if this one wasn't smushed either, then it would go apart. Yeah. And the only thing that's missing here is maybe some of these header styles. I'm not quite sure. And then it looks like the bar here. Either way, this is it's not super pretty, but it's starting to look like the Level Up site. And again, what's great about this will all be server-side rendered with no effort and no thinking about anything and no worrying about hydration. Oh my God, what is that? Like how worrying about hydration has been the bane of my existence. When you work in React and you do SSR and you're not using Next.js, and I don't know, maybe even if you are, there's an error that pops every once in a while and it says, I expected to find a div within div, but found a div. And it gives you, it doesn't tell you even what line, what file, it tells you nothing. And you're just supposed to say, oh, you know, I know that div that you're expecting to have. And well, I know why that div isn't there. And to me, like, if we're talking about the amount of things that I want to spend time on, that is the very bottom of my list of things that I would like to spend time on in web development. I want to make things fly around the screen. I want to make colors. I want to have a really satisfying CSS variable system. Do I want to try to find which div for some reason is not hydrating correctly? No, thank you. Holy cow, no. So yeah, this is me rant style. This stream could be Scott rants about React. We actually, I was just mentioning, we might do a syntax episode about that as well. Scott rants about React. And you know what? I think we should probably do it. I don't want to be too ungrateful. React has, React's done a lot for us. It's a free product. I don't have to use it. So, like I said, not exactly like firing off on the React team, but I do have quite a bit of frustration involved lately in using React. And I began a couple of days ago just thinking, you know what? How much of my life I've wasted on hydration issues in React? It's just way too many. And if I would have started converting the site over to Next.js or even something like Svelte Kit a month ago, I'd be done by now. But instead, I'm left with a site that hydrates very poorly. So, yeah, that's why I'm mad. Tell them why you're mad. That's why I'm mad. Are my kids home? My kids might be home, so I might have to. I hear a child. So you either might get to have an appearance from my son Landon saying hello, or they're not actually home, but I'm pretty sure they're home. Somebody says that the $ is greater than use effect. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's better than use effect. And you know what? I like hooks. And to be honest, I understand hooks very well. And I've written quite a bit of custom hooks. But yeah, I don't want to say anything bad about hooks because I do like them. But at the end of the day, they're not as smooth of a developer experience as many things in Svelte. So maybe it is time that I go all in on Svelte. But like I said, I do not want anyone who works at Level Up Tutorials to just quit because I'm changing the entire front-end framework of the entire site. So Kenny Gottfried is asking, what do you mean by hydrate? So when you're working with server-side rendering in React, you have two versions of the site. And in fact, what you do is you generate a string of the site. And in fact, we actually have to render the site twice. We have to run something called Svelte or React SSR prepass, and it renders the site twice, and it spits you out a big old string of what your site, the HTML of what your site is, that is generated entirely on the server. And so that is your HTML. And then what you do is in a node server, you just pass that along as any request that comes in, you make sure you generate the correct page, and then you send that string along. With any of your things involved in there. And then what happens is on the client side, you have a script load, and that script is going to be the main normal bundle that you would typically have. And you render into the same place you normally have, but instead of rendering with React DOM render, there's a hydrate method. And that hydrate method, what it does is it checks to see if the DOM, and this is a way oversimplified, so don't quote me on this, but what it does is it basically checks to see if the DOM is the same as the client-side DOM that it's rendering is the same as the server-side DOM. And when there is a mismatch of any kind, and I've even heard people complaining about like literal white space mismatch, not even like rendering the wrong component mismatch, but lightweight. When you have a mismatch in there whatsoever, React throws the most meaningless error of all time, just basically telling you, oh, there's a difference in this thing and this thing. But like I said, it gives you no line number, and it'll just say React expected a div, but got a div. And then it's up to you to say, oh, okay, let me find that div, wherever that div, who knows where that div may be. Let me find it. Somebody tells me to go to sleep. What do you mean go to sleep? It's 4 o'clock here. I still got another live stream after this. It might just be because I'm ranting. I'm in total rant mode, by the way. That said, I would like to do more live streaming like this, especially this kind of stuff. So I will figure out my computer setup. And one of the neat things that we'll be doing in the future, hopefully, is having a space where I can, record and do all this stuff anytime I want. So I don't want to make any announcements yet because I don't want to jinx anything, but there is something in the works there. These are kind of some bad class names. I would maybe like to rethink this, considering like what I'm doing here again is a proof of concept. This is, I can't say this enough, something that needs to look good at a distance. So this is me just really experimenting with Svelte Kit in this way. And if I were to legitimately do a full rewrite, it would be done with much more care than this. Okay, so some of these things, like this is totally unnecessary. Like in styled components, we were basically taking in a styled component and then augmenting it. So to do that, you pass it in as a string, interpolated string of the component value. But like, why couldn't I have just done, hey, if it has a class of layout, then here, let's augment it. The reason being is because out of the box, React doesn't really provide you with any great CSS scoping. Now, I don't want to use that as a cop-out because there certainly is scoping mechanisms that you can use in various libraries in React. But you're bringing in a library and you're really signing on to something. We brought on a library and signed on to styled components. And you know what? I loved working in styled components, but given the opportunity to go back into a time machine, would I pick them? I would pick them if I was planning on staying in React forever, which, you can kind of expect to do, stay in React forever. And who knows, we very well may be not leaving React whatsoever. Like I said, once our team is like, Scott, no, absolutely not. We can't do another refactor. I'm not unreasonable about that. I will concede. And if we were to do some sort of a full-scale Svelte rewrite like I'm, talking about right now, if we were to do something like that, it would be a big undertaking and it would take a long time. So here, like I said, I'm basically changing anything that is like a layout div, which is a styled component, to being just a div with a class of layout. And same thing with this grid div. I'll change this to a div with a class of grid, but you'll see that this div has a class of calls, or a property of calls. And this was a really neat little function I wrote in the styled component that allowed us to set the breakpoints for a div with a simple array. And this is really pretty okay. It's always worked well for us, and I like it. But how would you even go about approaching something like this where you need like dynamic values and all of a sudden Svelte can't provide you those dynamic values in your CSS? You know, that's one of the reasons I really love styled components is I could write components like this. Well, there's an easy way to do this, and it kind of involves me modifying this component a little bit. And once this hits 4:15, so like a couple minutes here, I'm going to have to bail because I'm doing a talk on imposter syndrome for Galvanize, which is a code bootcamp here in Denver. So if you want to hear me talk about imposter syndrome, check out my Twitter. We'll be tweeting about when that goes live. I think it's 5 o'clock even. Okay, so here's the grid component. We went all in on CSS custom properties, which was really one of the best decisions we've ever made. CSS Variables, fantastic. One of the best additions to CSS literally ever. And they're so good because they dynamically update. And I'm about to show you a cool example of why. So let's pull into the breakpoints file. I don't have my breakpoints memorized. Theme I'm using is Level Up Official Syntax Remix. This is the syntax version of Level Up Official. So if you're on the store, just look at Level Up Official, and then it's the syntax remix variant. It's syntax and Level Up tutorials colors all mashed up into one. So the grid component here, what we have is a couple of breakpoints, and this is the medium breakpoint, the small breakpoint, and this will be the large breakpoint, which is 960. And you'll notice here that these are using CSS variables to do some repeat var how many calls for one fraction. And so we can say large calls, and maybe the default for large calls will be 2 as well here, because I'm pretty sure that's what the default is anyway. So let's say if we're min width 960, large calls is going to be 2 by default. But let's say I wanted to D-Lennon. You can do that? Is that standard now? I saw that there was some syntax like that they were testing out, where you could define a property just like that. The way I've been doing it is somewhat similar to that, but it was just in a string inside of style. Style is equal to hyphen large hyphen calls. Oh, so it is new and it does work. Okay. Well, let's give that a try then. Oh, learning something today. So, okay, let's do 3 then. Let's see if this works. And in fact, this calls needs to be, I believe, large calls and not calls. Let me confirm that. Large calls. So this is the slowest speedrun ever because my CPU cannot keep up with my brain here. Large calls is 3. This thing is still not going to work because we have this syntax image wrapper. This is a div that becomes a class of equal to syntax image wrapper. Did I change that class name? I did. This is actually going to be a really interesting component. I would like to get this one done because this is an audio player. Oh, not sure if it works on HTML elements. Well, we will find out. Okay. Or we might not, because I'm just going to comment the actual audio player out. Okay, let's see if this thing actually renders now. Yeah, I swear, all these like React, criticisms I have I definitely have been one to, be very apologetic of the things that are not great in React. But like at some point, it just gets really frustrating, right? And, maybe I could pull it back a little bit and rethink some things. But, just, okay, so to answer D. Lennon's question, it looks like it's not going to work because large calls is not a valid attribute name. And that seems like it would probably work on a component, but maybe not in HTML just yet. I saw something about it from Swix on Twitter saying like they're implementing it now. So maybe this syntax is coming, but maybe it's not. Either way, all we need to do is say style is equal to a string value of large calls, and then instead of an equal sign, reset it here, and instead of the brackets, do it just in the straight up inline style. Okay. Paper is not defined. You're darn right, paper is not defined. Paper is just a component that we use anytime we want to have like some embellishment in the background. We use it for these like horizontal slashes. It can be inverted, it can be reversed, it can be skewed, it can be all sorts of cool stuff. But again, oh my God, my computer. But yeah, I really like working in Svelte Kit. And, you know, whether or not we do this rewrite, I think I would like to explore some sort of long-term rewrite plan where I'm at least, you know, trying to do it in various ways. Zones, Svelte, line 20. I'm going to say that the error messages are a heck of a ton better in Svelte too, but, you know, tooling is tough to get right on just about anything. Okay, so listen up. Paper is commented out. There's absolutely no reason, although there is all these class name stuff. You know, you could approach it several ways of just like rewriting a ton of stuff and then manipulating class to class name throughout large swaths of your project at once, including the SVG stuff. And that's the stuff where it hurts extra bad when you move a React component into just normal HTML and React itself. I think this might have gotten hung up. And, you know, you start to see like, oh, it's actually really annoying that React has chosen to take all of these standard HTML property names and change them. Because it's like, oh, it's not HTML. Oh. And it could just be being a, you know, grumpy old dev who worked in HTML a lot and likes HTML, but it could also be legitimately that Svelte is a little bit more dev friendly, you know? Okay, so here we go. Svelte Kit, refresh. Sometimes, I mean, Svelte Kit is still in beta, so sometimes I do need to restart it for the cache to be happy. And other times, you know, my CPU is just being a total baby, so. This thing says I'm getting 20 FPS. Wow. 20 whole frames per second. 4 more and we could be on the BBC. Although, what do they use now? I doubt they use 24 still. If anybody knows what PAL areas frames per second are now, let me know in the chat. I do not know. They used to be 24 frames per second. Or did they? No, film was 24. Is PAL 25? That seems weird. PAL might be 25. NTSC, for those of you who don't know, was 29.97. Oh, 2550. 2550 makes way more sense than 29 point whatever, and then now 60. Or I don't even know if US TV is in 60 frames per second. I doubt it, but yeah, 2550. Shout out. 24 is film. You know, I really like the 24 frames film look. 2996. Evan with the info. Chromium-based browsers. Yeah, you know what? I've gone back and forth on that. I used Safari for a little bit, and Safari feels great for the first couple of weeks. But Safari has a little bit of a trick that they pull, that the longer you use Safari, the worse it gets. And when you type in the URL bar of Safari, especially after a couple of weeks, there is like a good half a second to a second latency. And it might not seem like a whole lot, But when you click on the thing and you go to click and start typing and it doesn't work for like half a second, it always throws me off to the point where I want to just toss it out the window. But not a deal breaker, but still annoying. Also extensions, very annoying in Safari. Firefox, oh, hey, Firefox is pretty good. I don't like that they inserted ads into the bookmarks now, but what are you going to do? So here is that component, and granted, it is not the same, but I'm running out of time here, so I'm not going to be able to get the audio player bit going, which honestly is probably the most interesting part. So here's what you need to know about the audio player on the syntax component before I go, because I will probably do this off cam. The audio player is the API that we have for the podcast stream is an XML, which, that's lame, but it turns out that with XML, you import the RSS feed, then you use a straight up DOM parser, and then you can use straight up DOM methods such as get elements by tag name. So for us, it was really easy to say, all right, just parse this thing using this XML parser, then take the DOM, get elements by tag name, get an item, then select the title, then select the link, replace this CData BS, and then pass it along into state. Now, this little tidbit will be a little bit easier inside of Svelte, but unfortunately, I got to go because I have to prep for my next thing at 5. I'll be talking at Galvanize. So hit me up on Twitter at @stolinsky. You'll see a couple of retweets for that if you want to check that out. I'm going to be talking about imposter syndrome and how people can feel better about their place in the industry or what they're doing in their abilities to work as a developer and all sorts of professional environments. So thank you so much for watching and listening to me rant a little bit about React, and hopefully I at least showed you enough of this. I want to get a more speedrun aspect of this going where I'm legitimately going much faster. But, this homepage has a lot of interesting components, and I should say this entire site does, and none of them are super duper easy to move over. And this is the kind of stuff you're going to hit, and exactly why a giant migration would be very difficult. So thank you so much for watching. If you haven't, as always, check out the Syntax podcast at syntax.fm. Head on over to leveluptutorials.com. You can check out the client-side rendered version of our site, and by all means, it works very well, but I love to have a server-side version of the site in a much better capacity. And again, if you want to learn Svelte Kit, Svelte, animating in Svelte, any of that stuff, we have a Svelte Kit course out this month. And you know what? After this trip, I think I'm changing my course for June to be an advanced Svelte Kit course because I got a lot more to say on Svelte Kit. So check it out. Thank you so much for hanging out with me here, and I will see you in the next one. I'm going to be doing a lot more of these. So peace.